Okay, we are in 1 Kings chapter 6 tonight, and what I decided, chapter 6 and 7 are a lot of really technical architectural talk, and I know that can make for some fairly dry reading when you're reading the Bible, and I'm agonizing over just how to make this interesting, and then finally today it hit me, why not just show you pictures of stuff? So I now present you Solomon's Temple, a presentation for visual learners. I was almost going to say visual stinkers for Mark's benefit, but... And then when I got here, I found out that Ruth has this model of the temple, this three-dimensional model that she was about to give back to the person that made it, like tomorrow. I said, well, it's a good thing she hasn't given it back yet so we can show you what it looks like. Now, we're going to be talking about aspects of this as we go along, but this is just kind of a visual clue, if you will, an aid to see what the temple might have looked like. Now, anytime somebody draws a picture of the temple or builds a model of the temple, it's going to look different from everybody else's model. The reason why is because there's things about the temple that are, well, not told in the text. We don't know anything about what the roof of this thing looked like, for instance, because the Bible does not say. So whoever put this one together drew the little triangle-shaped wedges on the top of the roof. That may have been there, that may not have been there. I don't know. The Bible does not say. But there are things that the Bible does say, and that's what we're going to try to focus on tonight as we get into 1 Kings chapter 6.
Isn't that because Solomon's 35mm film is kind of faded over time?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, photography wasn't very reliable back then. So, they didn't have the Canon yet. So, bad joke. All right. Well, 1 Kings chapter 6, and we'll just go ahead and open up with the first 10 verses. It came about in the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, they began to build the house of the Lord. As for the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, its length was 60 cubits, its width 20 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Now this is kind of, again, a picture of what we're looking at here. This is a to scale model, 60 by 20 cubits. A cubit is about 1.5 feet, so you're really looking at 90 feet by 30 feet. That's an approximation anyway. Verse 3, the porch in front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits in length, corresponding to the width of the house, and its depth along the front of the house was 10 cubits. Also for the house he made windows with artistic frames. Against the wall of the house he built stories encompassing the walls of the house around both the nave and the inner sanctuary. Thus he made side chambers all around. Let's stop there. With verse 5, does anybody have a word that's different than the word stories? I thought the New American Standard made a really goofy choice there personally, but I'm curious what everybody else's Bible said in verse 5. Against the wall of the house he built side chambers. Yeah. Stories is not particularly helpful. It's the word actually can sometimes mean bed, but this is the only place it appears in an architectural context. And some people think these are chambers for the priests and Levites to sleep in. But chambers round about, a structure against the wall of the house is the ESV. New Living Translation calls it a complex of rooms. Basically what you've got is you've got this series of side chambers or store chambers that go around the temple like that. And you'll notice on this model of the temple, these two things protruding out of the sides, that part was not made up by the model builder. That part was actually in the Bible. They would protrude out just so, and then they would, it was 3 stories stacked on top of each other, and they'd come up about 2/3 of the height of the temple. Picking up in verse 6, the lowest story was 5 cubits wide, The middle was 6 cubits wide, and the third was 7 cubits wide. For on the outside he made offsets in the wall of the house all around in order that the beams would not be inserted in the walls of the house. Now that sounds kind of goofy, doesn't it? 5 cubits on the bottom story, 6 cubits in the middle, 7 cubits on the top. This thing's getting wider as you go up, isn't it? It doesn't seem like the most architecturally savvy thing to do. Well, this is probably what was really going on. They built these chambers, but the outside wall was flat, like that. And so they would build the offsets into that wall and kind of stack them one on top of the other. And these are two pictures which just kind of together I'm trying to convey the idea of what it would have looked like. And you could get from one story to the next by winding staircase. It's not certain where precisely in the grid that is, but that's what we're dealing with.
Well, it says so that the support beam not be fastened to the walls of the temple and things. So this makes sense. If got old, they could be replaced.
Right.
That way, instead of having them actually mortared into place. And actually mortar and wood doesn't work all that well together.
Yeah. Then there might be a certain symbolism to it as well. Just as, because you think about it, no wooden beams inserted into the temple proper. Nothing from outside the temple is really allowed to penetrate into the inside. That's how holiness works. Implicitly conveys the principle of holiness. One does not mix the holy with the common. And building on that idea, in verse 7, the house, while it was being built, was built of stone prepared at the quarry. There was neither hammer, nor axe, nor any iron tool heard in the whole house while it was being built. So no beams are inserted into the house, and no stones are prepared on site. There was no sound of iron tools be heard at this particular site. It's kind of similar to how, in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 27, God wants His altars built with uncut stones. Because if you use your tool on the stone, it would profane it. It would make it common. Well, here, the stones are cut off site. No tool is allowed to be used at the temple. It doesn't say why, but I imagine the reason is similar. That because it would have made it common or profane. Yeah, you got to cut them up. You got to cut them up somewhere else. And you got to transport them. Yeah. No, make sure that it's going to fit together while you're building it off-site, right?
Well, this took extra trouble.
Yes.
To make it this way, and there is a principle throughout really the Old Testament. The Lord is in His temple, that all the earth be silent before Him. So in building the temple, by not allowing any tools, the sound of tools to be used, this was an act of reverence.
Well,
that's the way I've always taken it.
Right. There's a sense in which, using your own tools on something or cutting a stone somehow defiled it or profaned it. That was the principle in Exodus 20 you get when they construct an altar. And I guess this seems to reflect a similar principle. But it would have been more trouble. It's like when we tried to cut ceiling tiles here, and we're in this back room and we're kind of figuring out, okay, because every tile was a different shape and met the wall in a different way. And Dennis was out there cutting the tiles one at a time. And at some point, I guess there was a miscommunication about what we needed versus what he was cutting. So we wound up cutting extra tiles. They come in and, this doesn't go anywhere. Well, what do we do? And Matt, he's just outside the door. Can run out and fix these things. Imagine if he's like miles away and just shipping these tiles to us one at a time as he cuts them. That would create a lot of, that would create even more difficulties. You better make sure the whole thing fits together before it gets to the site. Oh yeah, and imagine that these ceiling tiles were instead huge blocks of limestone. Then you're in real trouble. Just kind of, there's a lot of trouble that goes into the construction of this thing. He goes on more about the side chambers in verses 8 through 10. The doorway for the lowest side chamber was on the right side of the house. They would go up by winding stairs to the middle story, from the middle to the third. I guess that's the way you get up different stories. And he built the house and finished it. He covered the house with beams and planks of cedar. He also built the stories against the whole house, each 5 cubits high. They were fastened to the house with timbers of cedar. Now, there are, I keep saying I'm going to make a parallel chart with Chronicles. It's in process. It's in development. But Chronicles doesn't really talk about the side chambers very much at all. Chronicles kind of glosses over certain details. It tells us the basic dimensions of the house, but it kind of skips the part where he builds the side chambers. So if you read Chronicles by itself, you might not even know about these things. In verses 11 through 13, we have an interruption. It says that the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, "Concerning this house which you are building, if you will walk in my statutes and execute my ordinances and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will carry out my word with you, which I spoke to David your father. I will dwell among the sons of Israel and will not forsake my people Israel." What do we do about that? What do we think about the fact that God just sort of interrupts the narrative here to talk to Solomon? What's the point? I'm sorry? Yeah. God appears to Solomon. He reminds him what's important. The interruption signals what's important. Signals the priority. If Solomon is careful to follow the commandments, then God will fulfill his word to David. And he will dwell among Israel in the temple. What is the main point of the temple in this text? What does it say right here? What's the temple for? Verse 13, "I will dwell among the sons of Israel and will not forsake my people Israel." This is the big if Solomon is careful to fulfill the commandments, then God will fulfill his word to David. There's a conditionality to this promise. That's the kind of the interesting thing. The promise to David in 2 Samuel 7 doesn't mention conditions. It doesn't mention the if-then. If you will obey me, then I will bless you. But the conditions are implicit because they appear in other texts of the Bible as well. And they appear in this text, for instance. Now the main point of the temple here is God dwelling among his people. Just like with the tabernacle. Exodus 25 and verse 8, "I will dwell among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people." But that dwelling among Israel was conditional. It was a blessing of keeping the covenant. Was there ever a time when God did not dwell in that temple? When the temple was just an empty box? Did that ever happen? Yeah. In Jeremiah's day, the people were saying, "Oh, this is the temple of the Lord." And Jeremiah says, "You are trusting in deceptive words to no avail. Because the Lord will not dwell in this house if you're just coming here and pretending to be righteous and really going out and murdering and swearing and committing adultery and worshiping Baal." The obedience of mankind is going to make or break the temple and the people. The obedience of Solomon will make, that one man will make or break everything that takes place. Of course, later on, the obedience of one man makes or breaks the true temple of God. We know that through Jesus. In these verses 11 through 13, God stakes the fate of the temple on the faithfulness of the king, King Solomon. How does that work out? Well, it doesn't work out so great because Solomon ultimately doesn't prove to be faithful. But God stakes the existence of his true temple on the faithfulness of the true king, Jesus Christ. And how much more confidence can we have that? And the obedience of one man, will abound to the many. So, verse 14, Solomon built the house and finished it. Now he goes on to talk about the interior of this thing. He built the walls of the house on the inside with boards of cedar. And this is a picture of the interior gold area. This is exactly what it looked like. They took this picture and sent it in the future many, many years. Well, no, not really. This is an artist's rendition. And, we're going to look at how artists have disagreed over certain elements of this because we don't know exactly what it looked like, but this is one way it could have looked. Verse 15, he built the walls of the house on the inside with boards of cedar. From the floor of the house to the ceiling, he overlaid the walls on the inside with wood. He overlaid the floor of the house with boards of cypress. He built 20 cubits on the rear part of the house with boards of cedar from the floor to the ceiling. He built them for it on the inside as an inner sanctuary, even as the most holy place. The house, that is the nave in front of the inner sanctuary, was 40 cubits long. There was cedar on the house within, carved in the shape of gourds with open flowers. All was cedar. There was no stone seen. Not only can you not hear the stone being chiseled at the site, you can't even see the stone in the temple. But here's the thing, you can't see the wood either because they covered it all with gold. He prepared an inner sanctuary within the house in order to place the Ark of the Covenant for the Lord. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits in length, 20 cubits in width, 20 cubits in height. He overlaid it with pure gold. He also overlaid the altar with cedar. Solomon overlaid the inside of the house with pure gold. He drew chains of gold across the front of the inner sanctuary. He overlaid it with gold. He overlaid the whole house with gold until all the house was finished. Also the whole altar, which was by the inner sanctuary, he overlaid with gold. There's a lot of gold in this text. Let's ask ourselves a couple questions. First of all, why so much gold?
God Almighty.
Okay, belongs to God. Well, everything belongs to God ultimately. Why this in particular? Okay. He wants the best. Here's something else that's kind of interesting though. How many people would have seen this?
And God.
Yeah, and God, How many people, the most holy place, it's a perfect cube, wall to wall, floors, walls, I assume ceiling, made out of gold. Only one person ever gets to see that. Now, you had the similar thing going on in the tabernacle. The outer exterior of the tabernacle was basically, porpoise skins. It was gray. It didn't look like much from the outside. But you go inside, it's decorated with blue and purple and scarlet. The colors just kind of jump out at you. But the thing is, it's designed in such a way to be beautiful, and it's restricted in such a way to where nobody can ever see it. There's an implicit lesson here about the glory of God. He's far more glorious than we can imagine. But no man can see me, God says. No man can see my face and live. This is the sort of restrictiveness that God places on who can just see the glory in the temple. How much more glorious is the God who dwells in this temple in the first place? Gold is almost always reserved for the inside. You get it to the outside. Why isn't the outside of the temple gold plated? Why isn't the stuff in the courtyard gold plated?
Because there is one.
Wouldn't last very long,
Gold actually is very durable.
People would take it.
Well, the average person looks on the outside. So, there you go. Gold for God Almighty.
So, I think it's ultimately, it seems to boil down to more than just, God deserves the best. Because if God really deserves the best, why not plate the whole thing in gold? Why not plate the courtyard in gold? Or the bronze, why is the bronze altar made of bronze? Or more likely copper, actually. The translation is complex issue on that word. And the reason why is because there's a more implicit lesson that God is again teaching about His glory and about His holiness. There are a lot of references to gold. The giant golden cube. Of course, in Revelation 21 and verse 16, the holy city is 12,000 stadia by 12,000 stadia by 12,000 stadia. It's this perfect cube of basically solid gold, the holy city Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven. And it's designed to invoke an image of that most holy place. Because that's what heaven ultimately is. It's an entrance into the most holy place of God, the true most holy place, which is far bigger and grander and more vast than what we see in the temple. So that's something to keep in mind as well. The temple is also decorated with a lot of palm trees and flowers and gourds and blossoms. Why would they have done that? What would be the purpose of that? gourds. Well, I mean, why palm trees? Why flowers? Later on, you'll read about pomegranates. Why that?
All the palm trees, doors, and plants and things like that probably evoke the image of somewhat of an oasis.
Okay.
A place of tranquility and peace.
Okay. All right.
Yes, I mean, that's just a wild guess.
Okay. That's fair. What? Hey, that's another possibility, definitely. I mean, you know, we see the whole idea. I mean, what the temple isn't just a cold, dead place. It's a place of life. It's a place of fertility. It's a place of, you know, there's sort of an image being invoked of the Garden of Eden. But if we're supposed to think of the Garden of Eden, we might read a little further into verses 23 through 28. In the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. 5 cubits was one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the other wing of the cherub. From the end of one wing to the end of the other wing were 10 cubits. The other cherub was 10 cubits. Both the cherubim were of the same measure and the same form. The height of the one cherub was 10 cubits, so was the other cherub. He placed the cherubim in the midst of the inner house. The wings of the cherubim were spread out so that the wing of the one was touching the one wall, and the wing of the other cherub was touching the other wall. So their wings were touching each other in the center of the house. He also laid the cherubim with gold. Pop quiz. Where else in the Bible do we see cherubim?
Tabernacle, top of the ark.
Okay, good.
With their wings spread over the mercy seat.
Right. You see them in the Ark of the Covenant and their wings spread over the mercy seat. Where else?
Guarding the gates of the Garden of Eden.
Yes, they also guard the gates of the Garden of Eden. There's another reference to the Garden of Eden as well. Now, we don't know what cherubim look like. Here's a couple of different guesses that people have made. One of them has them a little more humanoid. And the upper picture, you got kind of this 4-faced thing. One face coming out this side, one face coming out this side. And kind of based off Ezekiel. But they got wings that spread from wall to wall and they're touching each other. The bottom picture is borrowed more from the Assyrian idea of what cherubim look like, which basically, let's see here. Yeah, it's some places.
Lion's body.
Yeah, it was like you know, in Akkadian mythology, the cherubim were spirits that served the gods and took on the bulls or lions with human heads and wings. Now, I don't know if that's what the Bible means by it or not, but what? Well, yeah, there's also bulls holding up the sea, which we'll get to later in chapter 7. Cherubim, there's 91 references to cherubs or cherubim in the Hebrew Bible, and we're not really clear on what they are. We know they had wings. Almost everywhere they're mentioned, they have wings. Their face is distinguished from that of a man in Ezekiel 10:14. And apparently they can be ridden on, because God is described as riding on the cherubs in Psalm 18 and verse 10. Now, what were they for? Well, they guarded the entrance to the Garden of Eden, Genesis 3:24. They were carved into the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, which Mark already pointed out. They were also woven into the tabernacle curtains, actually, in Exodus 26:1. And frequently God is described as the God who dwells above the cherubim or among the cherubim. Especially when people are moving the ark, they talk about the God that dwells above the cherubim. They also appear a lot in Ezekiel's temple vision, which are the cryptic, enigmatic visions. And of course, cherubim also are here guarding the most holy place. And they're carved into the walls of the temple, and they're carved into the doors of the temple, and they're even carved into the bronze water carts that are outside in the inner court of the temple. We're going to see that later. But I don't know exactly what they're for, but they always appear in God's sanctuaries. The Garden of Eden, the tabernacle, the temple, over the ark, under God's throne. The 4 living creatures in Revelation are not explicitly called cherubim in that text, but sometimes they're associated with them as well. And hence the words of the song that we sing, cherubim and seraphim falling down before thee. It's a reference to that whole worship scene in Revelation chapter 4, where they're singing holy, holy, holy. All right. So that's cherubim. Then we keep reading in verses 29 and onward. He carved all the walls of the house round about with carved engravings of cherubim, palm trees, open flowers, inner and outer sanctuaries. He overlaid the floor of the house with gold, inner and outer sanctuaries. You know, and if you think a gold floor is luxurious, you should see the streets of heaven, right? The entrance of the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood, the lintel, and 5-sided doorposts. So he made 2 doors of olive wood. He carved on them carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid them with gold. He spread the gold on the cherubim and on the palm trees. All right, I want to stop here and talk about these door frames for a second. Okay, in verse 31, the New American Standard says he made doors of olive wood, the lintel, and 5-sided doorposts. Anybody have something different at the end of verse 31? Oh, yes, Joe? Doorposts were 1/5 of the wall. Yeah, that's the KJV, the King James Version. Anybody else have something else? There's several different. There's a term in the architecture here that it's a little tricky. Some versions say 5-sided doorposts. Some versions say doors that were 1/5 the width of the sanctuary or 1/5 of the wall. And some say that, you know, there's a recent proposal though, based on archaeology, that kind of came up, which might be more accurate. And it's what we're talking about, recessed doors. That picture on the right was dug up at a place called Khirbet Qeiyafa. I actually know one of the guys that's involved in the excavation there. They found a model of a building with a recessed door frame in it. And you'll see kind of how the door frame is one door frame tucked in another door frame, tucked in another door frame on that building. If I had a laser pointer, I would point to it, but I left mine at home. So I did not plan well. Anyhow, the thought is that what's going on is we've got a 5-layer recessed door frame. And in verse 33, you have the same thing going on, a 4-layer recessed door frame. It's an obscure Hebrew term called mezuzah, which we didn't really know the meaning of until recently. Now, what's the point of that? Does that change people's salvation? Does that change the overall result of things? No, it doesn't. But it does suggest that, I guess there's a couple of inherent lessons in this. It says, for one, that we should always, don't assume that just because past generations studied this that it was all figured out. Well, sometimes there's more to learn. Don't assume that you have it all figured out now. And I shouldn't assume that either. There's always something else, just a little detail that can add to our understanding of the text. And it's a little thing here and there. It doesn't really impact things in a big way, but I think it's interesting to, that people are digging stuff up and who care enough about this to learn these things. Verse 33 continues that there was another door like this in the innermost sanctuary. He made for the entrance of the nave 4-sided doorposts, or a 4-layer recessed door frame of olive wood, and 2 doors of cypress wood. The 2 leaves of the one door turned on pivots, and the 2 leaves of the other door turned on pivots. He carved on it cherubim, palm trees, open flowers. He overlaid them with gold evenly applied on the engraved work. He built the inner court with 3 rows of cut stone and a row of cedar beams. In the 4th year, the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished throughout all its parts and according to all its plans. So he was 7 years in building it. Okay. Now, 7 years to build the temple. For a building this size and scale, it seems, I guess, about right. All things considered, moving all that stone back and forth. And then Kings kind of interrupts the narrative again with something else in verses 1 through 12. It says, Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. He built the house of the forest of Lebanon. Its length was 100 cubits, its width 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits, on 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams on the pillars. It was paneled with cedar above the side chambers, which were on the 45 pillars, 15 in each row. There were artistic window frames in 3 rows, and window was opposite window in 3 ranks. All the doorways and doorposts had squared artistic frames, and window was opposite window in 3 ranks. Then he made the hall of pillars. Its length was 50 cubits and its width 30 cubits. And a porch was in front of them, and pillars and a threshold in front of them. He made the hall of the throne where he was to judge, the hall of judgment, and it was paneled with cedar from floor to floor. His house where he was to live, the other court inward from the hall, was of the same workmanship. He also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom Solomon had married. All of these were of costly stones, of stone cut according to measure, sawed with saws, inside and outside, even from the foundation to the opening, and so on the outside to the great court. The foundation was of costly stones, even large stones, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. And above were costly stones, stone cut according to measure in cedar. So the great court all around had 3 rows of cut stone and a row of cedar beams, even as the inner court of the house of the Lord and the porch of the house. Question. What do we think of this house that Solomon builds here? I'm sorry? Yeah? Why don't we look at some to scale models of this? All right. On the left, Solomon's temple. On the right, the house of the forest of Lebanon, and the hall of pillars, and Solomon's palace complex also included 2 other houses which we don't know the dimensions of because the Bible does not say. Kind of interesting. What do we think about this? That he builds these houses for himself. He's never rebuked for this. It's kind of interesting. What was the reason for building the temple in the first place?
The reason for building the temple was God.
Yeah. What was it that prompted David to say, I want to build a temple? Yeah. Keith? Yeah. Yeah. The Ark of God's in a tent. I want to build him a house. I'm dwelling in a house of cedar. The Ark of God's in a tent. David saw an inequity there that wasn't right. It's not good when I'm living in a nicer house than God is. And God says, okay, you won't do that. Your son will do that. Build a grand house. And his son built God a grand house. You can see, the beauty and the splendor of it. There's just one thing he built that was bigger. It was his own house. Yes, Keith? Yeah.
Bad.
Right.
God's house was big enough to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
God's house was also, in some ways, I think, more resplendent than Solomon's house. If you will, completely lined with gold. That about Solomon's house. Now,
That's
Solomon's
true.
house was bigger. He had a family. He had wives, he had servants, he had the whole court. Things that didn't need to be done in God's house. Plus the fact that God told him, because you have asked for wisdom, not asked for great riches, not asked for these other things, I'm going to give you all these other things anyway. So God gives him everything, including this huge house.
Right. The story...
I don't know what,
It's hard to know what to make of this. Because the story doesn't tell... The author's not giving us his commentary yet. The author does not give us his commentary on anything questionable Solomon does until you get to chapter 11. Now it's clear that God approves of the temple, but even after the Lord moves into the temple, the main thing he tells Solomon is he warns him, that my dwelling here is contingent upon your faithfulness. And if you're not faithful, then this beautiful house you built will be reduced to ashes. People will come and burn it. The ark is moved into the temple at the beginning of chapter 8. Yeah. Yes. Yes, the ark is moved into the temple at the beginning of chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. Yes. So we're going to get there eventually. But so they do not have the ark when they build the second temple in Ezra. That's a different scenario. We're not really sure what happens to the ark after that point. But yeah, they do. The ark does eventually come into this temple. Okay. let's see. Oh, we're going to talk about pillars. Pillars, Solomon sent and brought Hiram. Well, first we're going to read about Hiram of Tyre. Solomon sent and brought Hiram from Tyre. He was a widow's son from the tribe of Naphtali. His father was a man of Tyre, a worker in bronze. He was filled with wisdom and understanding and skill for doing any work in bronze. So he came to King Solomon and performed all his work. And then what follows is a long list of stuff that Hiram of Tyre does. Now, one thing we need to realize is that this guy, Hiram of Tyre, is not the same guy as the Hiram in chapter 5, the king of Tyre. There's two different Hirams in this story. And 2 Chronicles chapter 2 clarifies it a little bit, but then of course confuses it further by spelling their names differently. So in 2 Chronicles 2, it refers to Hiram the king as Huram, and Hiram the skilled man as Huram-Abi. And they're two different people. Huram-Abi is a skilled man who is able to craft these things, and Hiram of Tyre is just the king of Tyre. Now Chronicles lists this guy's mother as a Danite woman, while Kings list his mother as a Naphthalite woman. I don't really know how to reconcile that, other than to just note that it's there. The point is that he was a half of an Israelite. And he's filled with wisdom and understanding. Now, if you remember, way back, 1,000,000 years ago, when we studied Exodus, there were two guys that they recruited to help build the tabernacle. There was Bezalel, the son of Uri, and there was Aholiab, the Danite. Bezalel was from the tribe of Judah. Aholiab was from the tribe of Dan. Right? And what was said about them was they were going to be filled with wisdom and understanding to design skillfully all of the items for the tabernacle. Now, do any such people exist in the construction of the temple? Any special artisans in the building of the temple? I'm sorry? Okay, Solomon would be one of them. And the other one would be this guy, Hiram. Yeah, these two guys play the same role. Now Hiram is tasked with making all of the bronze things in verses 15 through 47. And Solomon is tasked with making all of the gold things in verses 48 through 51. That's the remainder of chapter 7, is what Hiram or Huram-Abi built and what Solomon built. In verse 15, Hiram fashioned the two pillars of bronze. Here's the pillars. 18 cubits was the height of one pillar, and the line of 12 cubits measured the circumference of both. He also made two capitals of molten bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. The height of the one capital was 5 cubits. The height of the other capital was 5 cubits. There were nets of network and twisted threads of chain work for the capitals which were on the top of the pillars. 7 for one capital, 7 for the other capital. So he made the pillars in 2 rows around on the one network to cover the capitals which were on the top of the pomegranates. So we did for the other capital. The capitals which were on the top of the pillars in the porch were of the lily design, 4 cubits. There were capitals of the 2 pillars, even above and close to the rounded projection which was beside the network. The pomegranates numbered 200 in rows around both capitals. Thus he set up the pillars at the porch of the nave, and he set up the right pillar and named it Yakin, and he set up the left pillar and named it Boaz. On the top of the pillars was lily design, so the work of the pillars was finished. Okay, so again, this is kind of an artist imagining of what the pillars would have looked like. You get the pillar themselves. Near the top, you've got the kind of the chain network. You'll notice also under that chain network are these little bead-like things. Those were the pomegranates. And at the top, it's kind of an open flower effect going on, like the lilies. There's kind of a cruder form of it here with this model as well. Now, here we have 5 minutes left, so we're going to maybe push through some of this. The pillars were actually hollow on the inside too, although we don't know that from reading Kings. We know that from reading Jeremiah 52:21. When they take the pillars apart, they find out that they're hollow on the inside. So that is mentioned as well. The 2 names of the pillars, anybody know what they mean? Yakin and Boaz? In 7:15 it says it was hollow. Fashion the 2 pillars of bronze, 18 cubits is the height of one pillar, and the height of 12 cubits measured. Huh. What version are you reading? You're reading the ESV? I did not know that. That's interesting. I will have to go back and look at that and figure out what's going on there. I know Jeremiah makes it explicit that they're hollow, so, I mean... Yeah, you could probably figure that out if you tapped on it, but again, we don't have the benefit of time travel, so that's where we're stuck. The 2 pillars were named Yakin, which means he will establish. It's a form of the word that we saw back in chapter 2, where they talk about Solomon's throne being established, Solomon's kingdom being established. Well, Yakin, he will establish, talking about the Lord. And Boaz means in strength, or probably in him is strength. So it's just kind of, again, a reminder of the promises that the Lord had made to David. He promised to set Solomon up on the throne. He promised to set David's descendant on the throne and establish him. And the pillars mean, well, he will establish in his strength. There's another element that's not mentioned in Kings, but I'm going to mention it here because in the parallel list, this is where it appears, is the altar, the bronze altar. And only mentioned in Chronicles, in 1 Chronicles chapter 4 and verse 1. The tabernacle had a bronze altar for burnt offerings. The temple had a bigger one. An altar that was 30 feet by 30 feet, and then it was 15 feet tall. Which, we were trying to figure this out earlier. If Goliath stood on top of himself, he could probably, peek over the edge a little bit. But almost every artist, even though no passage in the Bible says this, every artist's rendition I find of this altar has like a staircase or a ramp going up to it. Because that's the only way you're getting up there. You've got to drag the sacrifices up to the top of this thing and offer them on what is effectively 900 square feet of burning surface. So we can infer the existence of some kind of ramp or staircase. A ramp is maybe more likely since the Lord said, don't go up by steps to my altar in Exodus 20. But admittedly, well, we don't know for certain. So, the temple was a place of sacrifice as well. The sea, let's talk about the sea. Pick up in verse 23. He made the sea of cast metal, 10 cubits from brim to brim, circular in form. Its height was 5 cubits and 30 cubits in circumference. Under its brim, gourds went around, encircling it 10 to a cubit, completely surrounding the sea. The gourds were in 2 rows, cast with the rest. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea was set on top of them, and all their rear parts turned inward. It was a handbreadth thick, and its brim was like the brim of a cup. As a lily blossom, it could hold 2,000 baths. Now the sea, there's kind of a couple of interesting points that can be made here. First of all, it's 10 cubits wide, it's 5 cubits high, it's 30 cubits around. Anybody here who's a math nerd will know, well, wait a second. You can't have 10 cubit diameter and 30 cubit circumference. It's 31.415926535 cubits circumference. Now, that's just an approximation, right? But the Bible doesn't even say 31 cubits or 31 and a half cubits. Instead, the Bible just says 30, and it's content to leave it at that. Is the Bible being inaccurate? No. This is an example of how the Scripture can be accurate without necessarily being precise. And, a rounded number is considered, well, good enough. The Scripture does that. It does that here mathematically.
We do that all the time in our society.
Yeah, we do it all the time in our society. The Bible does it all over the place. And this is one very clear example of that. So one thing, sometimes people will point to like numerical inconsistencies in the Bible and they'll get all worked up and say, oh, well, I can't believe because of this. And some of it has to do, I'm not saying this solves every issue, but some of it has to do with a confusion of accuracy and precision. I can say that, I live half an hour away from Tampa. I can say that I live 45 minutes away from Tampa, or 40 minutes away from Tampa, or 39 minutes away from Tampa. And with each one of those figures, I'm being slightly more precise. But if I make all of those statements at various times, and they get recorded and compiled together, and people look at them and go, oh, you're being contradictory. No, I'm approximating, which is perfectly legit. It's considered legitimate in every form of communication, except apparently when you're a skeptic reading the Bible. And then all of a sudden it's inappropriate. Now, we're out of time. There are some deeper significances to the sea that I want to talk about, but we'll save that for next time. Any comments or questions before we close? Yes, Jen? The big bulls with wheels in the background are the next thing we're going to talk about after the sea. Yeah, in fact, that's the one thing that gets more attention in this chapter than anything else is the water carts. It's the strangest thing, but we will talk about that next time. So be prepared. That's a preview of what's to come. Thank you all for your time and attention. We'll pick up next time. 1 Kings 7.